Welcome. This was advertised as being a 122 gigahertz talk, but bonus information. We're going to talk about Cassegrain antennas, something I perhaps should have spoken about some time ago. So, just a quick update. Those that have been watching some of the VHF groups, 122 gigahertz is now more popular than 80 metres.
Yeah.
122 gigs, about 6 months ago, Andrew 3CV sent me his prototype board, layout and everything else, and wanted some comment on it, proofreading, things like that. And what he had used is a new radar chip that's designed to go on drones that works on 122 gigahertz. It's made by a German company called Silicon Radar in Frankfurt. And there was they've only been around since about mid-late last year. They were presented the microwave update K6ML, I think it was, presented a prototype transceiver based on one version of the chip, and Andrew had seen that and started doing his own work. So he's now actually produced not a kit but a design which has gone in Jubis, which looks quite good. It's using the smaller of the two chips, which is intended for short range, and using a little horn feed. Meantime, I looked at that and then spoke to the Germans, and they're going, it would be good to have a good receiver. Now, the beauty of the chip is actually, I'll just bring up one of the, this is the main board, but I'll bring a circuit board. Now, there's the board, and that's where the chip sits. Now, the chip is, to put that in perspective, that board is 25mm high and about 50mm wide, and the chip is that bit sitting up there. The chip is 8mm by 8mm, and it actually has two antennae in it. So this is my prototype, which I'm working on. The boards aren't here quite yet, but I should be able to find a photo. That's what the chip looks like. And if you look very closely, you will see there are two collinear antennas on that chip. Total chip size is 8mm by 8mm, so the collinears are about 2mm, 2 to 3mm across. See the antennas there? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 patches. That's transmit, that's receive. So that's the chip. It puts out about 0.5 to 1 milliwatt. Which is about the same power as we get out of our triplers on a good day, if the diodes are still working. But the beauty of this chip is that it actually has a preamp. Until this chip has been available, there's been nothing there other than mixer diodes. And to put the performance in perspective, a mixer diode is about 30 dB noise figure. These things are quoted about 8 dB noise figure. So while they put out about the same amount of power as our triplets, and it is basically a VCO, and an amplifier, multiplier, and a quadrature mixer, all in that chip. Until this chip, there was nothing, no preamps, nothing. So what a few people are interested in is just using these as receivers, because 20 dB is a massive difference. It's about the difference between a crystal set and something decent. So that was the original Silicon Radar prototype board. I managed to get the artwork for that. Basically what I've developed is something which goes on from there. Silicon Radar have a number of different development kits if you've got lots of money. Another one, there's a chip sitting on a board, which they sell that as a development kit for testing the radar. It has an ARM chip on there, and this is the RF chip. Right next to it is the actual phase lock loop. And you see two little capacitors there. That's the divide by 64 coming out, so that's 1.9 gigs plus or minus coming into a ADF. They actually use it for 159, same as I do. So that's the basic phase lock loop. It has an oscillator. That board is very noisy, very wobbly, because it's radar, it doesn't make any difference. But the chip itself has an FSK input, which you can input data into. So what Andrew's done a simpler version using the smaller chip and using some focusing. And the smaller chip, the antennas are actually etched on the silicon die. For cost reasons, they're cheaper to make and so forth, whereas this is based on a bit of ceramic board separate to the chip. The version they use are the little daughter board on that sitting on a beagle, one of those beagle bone small computers. So this company is a venture funded company that are basically developing these chips for autonomous drones. The 122 is an ISM band, so it's license free, and in their intended environment, the communications range is only about 10 metres. So instead of your Phantoms and things use ultrasonics now, this is using radar, and the whole idea is to have 6 of these all the way around. So one front, one back, one left, one right, one up, one down, and to actually model the area around the steering.
What sort of price are they asking for those?
The chips are only €35. They're not that expensive. That's the silly thing about all this. So there's the chip. That's it sitting there. I had to create the part in part of this project. We've been working on this for about 3 months. Part of this project was actually learning Autodesk Eagle. So this is probably one of my early attempts, but I had to create the part. You'll see there's very few pins used. There's about half a dozen pins on this side which have do not connect on the data sheet, which I suspect that they've actually got some functionality on the die that they're not using yet. The rest of the pins are not used. And all that's on that board is basically, that's all, there's nothing over 2 gigs on the board. The 2 connectors over here, these ugly looking things, UFL style miniature coax connectors. So instead of using the traces, I've gone to a coax connection between the front board and the main board for the 1.1 gig RF. So that's the project. I was hoping to have some boards here, but they're still on DHL. They're not even in the country yet. Looks like a lot of stuff up there, and there is in a way. I haven't got a laser pointer with me, but I'm using an Arduino Pro Mini as the processor, rather than putting something on the board, just something that's easy to get. So that's the 2 connections there. One side is digital, the other side is analog. So there's 2 edge connectors. Unfortunately, they're the symbols for the UFL connectors. They're only about 3 mil square in reality. There's the phase-lock loop, which is an analog device's ADF4159, which is a 13 gig phase-lock loop. This board you can use with the VCO as a 13 gig phase-lock loop if you wanted to. Used an active VCO filter rather than a passive one. The reason for that is to get a little bit more linear response range, hopefully reduce noise and so forth. These things here are just level converters that are used between the Arduino, which is 3.3 volts. This thing's 1.8 volt logic. The chip on the front's 1.2 volt logic. So we've got, these are just bidirectional level converters. If you want to change to some other voltage, all you do is change these are very simple things to use. 3.3 use a reference here, 1.8 use a reference there, and the output's 1.8. And this is the one that drives the chip on the front. The rest is just power supplies down here. There's a main 5 volt power supply. Then there's a low noise, costs about $10 a chip, low noise 3.3 volt supply that they use with these phase-lock loops normally, and a 1.8 volt supply just for that over there. Now the interesting bit here is, because this is actually an image reject, the front chip is an image reject, which means that you could use it as an SDR if you wanted to, but you can use it as an image reject receiver. There's 2 outputs, and what I've got here is a mini circuit. It's 120, 180 meg 90 degree hybrid. You plug 2 signals in, it's just like sideband. When you use a phasing arrangement sideband, you end up with 1 output rather than 2. So you have a single sideband. Get rid of the image, you don't need any filtering in front, going 3 dB. Very simple PGA 103 preamp, post IF amp. A couple of diodes to hopefully take care of any RF if you accidentally put RF in the back, and that goes off to your transceiver. 10 megs in, through a filter, and goes in there. So it's a lot of stuff. It actually is functionally fairly simple. I'll actually show Andrew's drawing. So that's pretty well that's it. That's the board. That's dimensionally those connectors we're looking at before. They're 2 headers, so they're just 90 degree headers. So this board sits flat, and that's 50 mil by 65 mil, sits flat. And then the other board sits in front at 90 degrees. So it looks like that. And that sits in, probably would fit in a box like that, so then you put that in front of your dish, so you've only got that facing towards. Now the beauty of the antenna on these things is that they have a 90-degree pattern. And a 90-degree pattern is perfect to feed not something that big, but a 0.3, 0.35 dish. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is that
It goes everywhere.
oh, well, it doesn't go everywhere, Steve, but disadvantage is, where are we? Disadvantage is that, sorry, stay on board. The two antennas are in different spots, which means you need to move. They're about 3 mil apart, so the focus shifts. So that's the only disadvantage of both the chips, because they've got separate antennas. You have to allow for it. So there's two ways of doing that, and this is something we have to experiment with. But one way is to combine it into a combiner. The problem with that is, and this is the other problem with these chips, the transmitters transmit all the time. So they're duplex. The bigger chip, this one, you can power it down about 6 dB, so that drops the amount of power. The other one you can't power down. So the problem with Andrew's, it's an interesting scenario, but unless you match them properly, you get reflected power back at least sends to the receiver. So that's something that needs to be considered. So I've just elected to go with these here, and then you have to come up with a way of shifting it across. So there's two ways of doing that. You can shift it 3.1 mil, or if you've got 3 supports, adjust one support. So it slews across, because it actually needs to slew inside. So that's where we're up to. The guy in the US came up with a very simple sort of sliding arrangement that worked between the two. The other way is, if you've got accurate control of your dish, is just to shift the dish between the two. A lot of these really get just used with receivers, not a problem, or you can use 2 dishes. So that's the design as it is. I'll quickly show you Andrew. He's done a fantastic job. It opens, there he is. So that's actually using a TVRO type antenna. And where are we? So he's made a horn arrangement up. So that's sitting as a combiner and a horn. So that's combining the two, the receive and transmit streams into one. So it's like an oblong arrangement. That's a horn feed. There we go. That's a Cassegrain arrangement. So that's sitting in front of the chip. The whole idea is the two signals are combined and then come out a round waveguide, and that Cassegrain then is to illuminate the dish. There's some conjecture as to how efficient that chip is. If you look at it, it's got 0 dB gain in sort of all sorts of directions. So you cannot use it by itself. The antennas are actually etched on the silicon die, so they must spray all over the place. But these will be available. I think it's in the emails last day. So 2XAX is going to get them pre-populated. So that's the difference there. He's got it all on one board. He's got the chip in the middle, one of the other side. There it is. That's the chip there. So the antenna is actually under the plastic. It's what they call the version 2, and I think that's the one they'll mass produce because it's cheaper to do everything in one die than have a separate hybrid. So that's 5 mil by 5 mil. So and he's put the process from the board here. It's interesting. This company is bringing out other chips. Their website doesn't have much detail at the moment, but they're bringing out one of these bigger chips with the actual RF coming off the board, so you can use it with external antennas, and that's probably the better one to use. But it's only a big prototype. They're also doing chips for 60 gigahertz. They do chips for 24 gigs, and they're experimenting with 300 gigs. So. Now that Andrew held the world record for about 3 weeks between Mount Dandenong and a spot out to the west of Melbourne, 59 k's. And this both ends using
Australian record.
Australian record. Yeah, it was. Australian record. Yes. Australian record, not world record. World record was 132 k's, and one of the world record holders is here in November. So here we go. Okay. So that's 122. Probably not much else. This is the old test set. So that's the original one did about 3 years ago. I've not pulled it apart because it works.
It works, yeah.
Like that.
There we go.
And it's basically a single diode mixer. Output's probably 100 microwatts or something like that when it triples. An Elcom oscillator. There's an aux in there, so it's all self-contained. Little IF thing, and the most necessary part is one of those cheap rifle scopes that you can see me pointing it out. So that's the best that's done was about 24 k's or something. Board. Maybe one night we might do a printed circuit board thing. I haven't done printed circuit boards for 15 years. Last time I did printed circuit boards was using Protel. And now there's all these auto routing things and so forth. First thing you do is turn the auto routing off, so it's got no idea about RF layouts and so forth. But the one thing I found very quickly is it's a good idea to do things in blocks. So there's a phase lock loop block. These things here are those little tiny UFL connectors. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're used inside most modern transceivers now. That really micro fine 0.8 mil coax. I think I brought one along. No, it's got to be somewhere. So that's the whole idea of that board. You can actually use it with any front end board you want it to. You can use it as a phase lock loop up to 13 gigs, all you need is a VCA. I was trying to model, it's a 4-layer printed circuit board, and I was previously, when I was doing the artwork, I was running the RF on tracks underneath. I was trying to model the impedance of sandwiched, and this is not 1.6, this is 1.2 mil, so there's 4 layers in 1.2. So the 0.4, you've got 0.4 layers, but the way they do a 4-layer board is they have like a 0.6 in the middle to start with, so it's just a normal double-sided board, and then they lay 2 sides on top, so it's 0.3 mil-ish. So in the end, I couldn't really, there was no way to guarantee it was going to be 50 ohms, and at 1.9 gigs, I went, okay, compromise. So in the end, short tracks, and then that miniature 50 ohm coax, and there's heaps of signal. There's like plus, minus 3 dBm coming out the chip. So you could lose 2-3 dB. You can swap them around, do whatever you like, and you can buy the coax with connectors for about $4 or $5, about 40 mil length that needs to connect between the two. Here is where the Arduino Pro Mini sits. The idea of using a separate Pro Mini is, well, A, they're cheap, they're $3. B, it keeps a bit of the digital stuff off the board, so there's really no noisy digital stuff anywhere on the board. These are the level converters over here. Here's a filter, like a 7-pole filter on 10 megs. That big looking thing is the actual mini surface hybrid, so that's just a noise rephase shifter. And here we have some little links and pads, so you can swap around and pick the right image, either the upper or lower. There's the preamp, runs out the back here. There's an IF connection out there. That's the reference in, and that's the header. Underneath, quick show of that. That's the bottom. On the bottom is all the DC components. So now there's 2 layers in between this. There's probably about a dozen tracks in each of those layers. So that's why there doesn't look like as much on there. What I've done is run pretty well the longer stuff in between the layers. Very simple circuit. There's a PVC fuse there, a diode, and 4007 type thing to blow that if you put too much, put the voltage backwards. 5-volt regulator. There's a big 30-grat resistor. I'll put that in on the other side, so that drops the voltage from 12 volts down to somewhere near 5 volts. The low noise regulator is there, and the 3-volt regulator is there, and this is the precision instrumentation op amp that's used for the VCO chip network. And that's it, so there's not much on the bottom side. Okay, that's probably enough about that. Now we might talk about Cassegrains. So this is probably the subject by itself, but I've been mucking around with these. This was on and off. We've been using Cassegrains. Nuret, that's a Cassegrain in there. commercially available Cassegrain. Focal point's about 40mm inside. The dish itself is 0.4 F/D, so quite shallow, and it has quite a large Cassegrain. Now the biggest problem with the Cassegrain is they're pretty hard. There's an enormous amount of mathematics to get them right, and even then there's a margin of error and all sorts of things. So probably the first thing I'd say is, if you can use anything else, use it. Cassegrain really is a real design thing. That's shepherd's crook is probably one of the most reliable things, even with a bit of a flat plate as a chaparral to spread the RF, and that works. It worked in on evaporation ducting with that dish over 155 k's. Works quite well. This works as good as that now, but it took a long time to get there. So the problem being is the principle of the Cassegrain. If it's an optical Cassegrain where you've got a source which it's linear and has no taper at the edge, this is just a hyperbola, so you end up with two focus points. Your normal dish focal point sitting behind there. Sorry, it's not a real good picture. So to do a PowerPoint. But that's a very simple Cassegrain. Instead of having a feed point facing back here, you have it here, it reflects off that. So it goes boom, 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 in theory. The reason for doing that is waveguide at these frequencies has a very high loss. The other alternative is to put the equipment in the front, and in reality, if you can make it small enough, that's probably the best way to go, but you end up with a fair bit of equipment out the front there. Our friends in Austria do that. If anything, one way to go. But this gave us a bit of a try. So you end up with an arrangement that looks exactly like this. Where you have a feed horn. So this one's proven set up in all dimensions. So the horn is 20 dBi horn. The Cassegrain has been calculated for that particular horn and that dish. Now, the factors that determine the shape of the hyperbola here, it is partly to do with the F/D of the dish and everything else, but the other thing you have to factor is that a horn feed isn't 10 dB across or 20 dB across, it has a taper. So if you don't allow for that taper, all you end up doing is illuminating about 300 mil of that, not 600 mil. So the actual shape, instead of being almost spheroid, which is the case for like an optical type Cassegrain, it has a peak in the middle and then has a lot faster taper. So the majority of RF that hits that first section, because a horn feed like that literally is actually the 10 dB points, it's actually 12 dB they reckon, is at the tips of that disc. So it's illuminating at -12 and then it's nothing up past that. But the majority of the RF in the middle is hitting a section that already has an angle and sending it out to here and then to here. The relationship to all that is about 5 formulas to get it somewhere near it, and even then it's not quite right. Luckily, Paul Wade, you all heard of Paul Wade? Paul Wade did a spreadsheet. Turn that back for you if you like. Okay.
That's all right.
Paul Wade did a spreadsheet. And hopefully I've got any of it. There's something called Cassegrain. That's what waveguide loss is like at different frequencies. So for this over here, we've got WR19. WR19 is where are we? Where's WR19? That's it there, I think it's that. Next one. No, it's that one there.
That one, yeah,
That one
goes
there.
to 100, yeah.
Yeah, actually, it should be. No, WR19 should be back here. It's that one there. 50 gigs. So it's about a dB per metre. Once you get to 122, it's 4 to 6 dB per metre. So, and that's pure copper. Try and get pure copper. If your silver plate is better than that. If you use brass, which a lot of this waveguide is, it's higher loss. So waveguide loss is a major thing. The other thing is it's damn expensive. We use hobby brass. at these frequencies. So brass isn't as good as copper. Maybe silver plated if you want to do that sort of thing. But you know, that's the thing we're fighting against. But our friend Paul Wade, who's a wonderful engineer, has come up with a spreadsheet. So this is this dish over here. That's 47 in there. There's 76, just a smaller version. Thank you, John. I still haven't set the thing yet, but I'm actually using that as a slide adjustment so we can check this. But if we slot that in, this is the calculations I used with this. Now, one thing you have to realise, all horns, the focal point is basically at the face or within a couple of millimetre inside. So that's number one. That's where the face centre actually is. So here's this little thing here, very important. Get that right. The rest of it's pretty standard stuff. So 600mm dish, this is this actual dish here, 0.38 is the F over D. Feed horn equivalent focal distance. That is another formula you need. So basically what you're doing there is working out what F over D this here would actually need to feed. So you need, because it's a narrow beam, the F over D, it would have to be roughly 1.5 times the dome of the dish away from a normal dish to actually illuminate it properly, because the angle on this is about 30 something degrees. You might be up there somewhere. So that's a bit tricky. That's the bit that takes a bit of fiddling to get right. If you imagine an offset dish where the F over D is 0.6, lot shorter horn. So what Paul's done, it's pretty close. He's done this spreadsheet. That's the hardest thing. The rest of it's pretty easy to work out. You then go down through. All this is self-calculating type stuff. Works out feed horn diameter. So that is the actual diameter in millimetres of that, 15mm. Phone centre, we enter all those figures in, and then we start going down the page and getting it. It actually comes up with suggested taper. Now that suggested taper is you need to, that's the 12 dB point on the horn. And this is getting the shape right for the hyperbola. And it usually works out around 12 dB. So it's, most horns are rated 10, but you do need to plot. You do your horn and do a bit of a pattern and plot it and see how it varies. Or go, give that a try, which is what I did. So now we're working out the sub-director diameter. Now, general rule of thumb, the Cassegrain needs to be at least 10 wavelengths in diameter. So for 47 gigs, that means it needs to be about, sorry, maths not working very good, but about, that's 6 centimetres, 6.5 centimetres, so it needs to be 65. That's exactly what that is, it's just on 10. At 76 gigs, it's quite a bit bigger. It's actually 22, I think it's 14, it's actually that one, that's 89. 22 is quite good. If you look at the NURAD, they're about, that works out on 24 gigs exactly to be 10 wavelengths or something like that. And then at higher frequencies it goes up higher. So this is actually a decision point you make. You sort of add this data in. So then you stick that in, and then we get some calcs down here. It'll actually give you a theoretical loss. The whole idea is to keep this under 1 dB on the front. And then it'll come up with a geometry. And you come up with these numbers here. Which is fantastic. How do you use those numbers? Okay. What it is, there's 3 actual hyperbolas in there. One is the theoretical hyperbola, and the other one is a hyperbola which then accounts for the calculations up here, where you've worked out the pattern of the feed, and it assumes there's going to be a taper like that that falls off the edge. Okay, tricky bit with that is how do you use that? Someone else came up with a little script that you can use in CAD to design the hyperbola. So then you can 3D print the things. You can CNC machine things. So there's actually another one. You've got that other one in there. This has just been 3D printed on a fine setting. the beauty of that is that, okay, it might take about 10, 12 hours to print something like that, but if it's not right, you can throw it away and put something else on it. Which has happened a couple of times. It's close to working. I've had one test with Ian, and yes, it worked, and it had more gain than the new red, so that was probably the main test. All I've done with it is give it a little. It's actually quite, when you use a 0.6mm setting, it's quite smooth. Give it a little bit of a smooth, and that's just alfoil on top of it. And it's been arrow guided to a Bunnings piece of metal, and then it's on a couple of bits of all thread, and I can adjust the thing in and out. But I've never had to adjust it, because this bit always works out right. It's just the shape and the distances, because you know the focus is going to be there, and it's pretty well bang on equals to that. If the focus is there, it's about there, so it's about the same distance either side. And then this, if you've got that right, should be about there. The arrangement, thanks to John's machining, is that I can pull that in and out of it. So actually, it's actually set so it's a little bit out, so I can push it in further. So it should actually sit about there. There's a mark here for that one. You sit there and just play with it until you get the strongest signal. The idea of having common feeds is that once you line up in 47 gigs, you then move to 76 gigs. And thanks to the alignment of everything straight, it should be in the right spot, same thing. Now this one I haven't, the boss isn't connected properly yet because I'm still experimenting with it. But the focus on that, because it's from the face, ended up being a bit further back. Like longer way of going would have needed. But it was about there. And the interesting bit with this, it's a peak, but it's not a real sharp peak. If everything's working well, you don't get any sort of funny, wishy-washy movements. The biggest problem with the Cassegrain, if you haven't got it right, is that you end up only, and this is the problem with the splash feed, is if the geometry's not right, you end up just illuminating a section of dish, a donut section. This is what happens with splash plates. As you can imagine, you're hitting something, but the target changes, distance and everything else. You progressively illuminate like a donut. So if it's close to right, it's critical, but it's not that critical. It's not like chop, 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 chop as you move. You know, the wavelength's only 4mm and you get all these ups and downs. It's sort of about, it'll peak about there. You go, okay, that's about the right spot there. I don't think this Cassegrain is perfect yet, and that's all to do with that finger at the top. But this spreadsheet's brilliant. All you have to do is work at your feed horn, and just sort of, it's the characteristics of the feed horn that's going to determine everything else. And what, if the feed horn, you've either mapped it or you've got a commercial one, and there's some you can get which cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. If we can work out a way of machining these things, John, you'd make yourself a mint. Just a side note, 3D printed, that's for 47 gigs, perfect shape, it's perfect fit over a waveguide, and I don't know how well you can see that, Ian. That's my less than perfect attempt at copper plating J-car, that carbon filled conductive sort of plastic they use, PLA. It's well, I won't say it's rubbish, but it's not really good quality. But the interesting bit, it actually has, the horn is perfect shape, so probably nickel spray or someone who can link away and go to a couple of links to people that do plastic electroplating and things like that, or nickel spray or something like that. But these are just little brass tests. Once you get the right shape, it's 3D printed them. Matt 3 MAT's doing that in Victoria. He's got a right into it. So in fact, we were backwards and forwards on this after Gipstech, just getting things right and working and finding all the bits and pieces. So that's a Cassegrain. Is it worth it? Jury's out to be out. There's a lot of work. This system here, I can quickly swap to a feed like this, and yes, it's open waveguide, and yes, that ring probably does spread the signal a bit. We know it works. We know it's at the right focal length, all that sort of stuff. I think you can get this going, but any idea of using above 76 gigs. I think for lower frequencies perhaps, but it's just the performance of your feed horn, if that's not right and it's squirting RF in all sorts of directions. It's not real
It's going to work too well.
No, but it works better than splash plate, but how long that is, I don't know. So gain of that would be 76 gigs, about 47 dB or something, so it is quite sharp. And that's the other test, if you've got
How many dB gain?
about 47.
Oh,
Yeah, about that. The other test is whether it's sharp, and it's the problem we've all experienced. When the feed's not right, you'll get two peaks, and really that's just sort of you get this dead spot at the front. And that's partly the donut effect. It's not sort of very, very fussy. You think all this stuff would scale, but it doesn't. It just seems to get all sorts of